before I go back to your second question, Dave,
Okay.
so the short version was trying to find out consistent tracking information between an e-commerce store and Google Analytics, whether Universal Analytics and Google Analytics 4.
Yeah, that's basically it. We're just kind of seeing it. Sometimes we see it, it's like, what? It's almost double the sales, or it's like, what the heck is going on? And so we're diving in. Part of it is, I don't know what Google does with, so we've got the Canadian dollar versus the US dollar. We've got, I don't know if Google Analytics lines up the exact date of when the sale, the actual sale happens. There's, is it gross money? Is it net? And then, like when we were setting up Google Analytics 4 earlier today, Brian and I noticed we hadn't set the time zone right. So if somebody, what is that? What you're going to ask?
Time zone.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
Well, so we've got a few weeks on this Verdant Tarp site. We have a few weeks of GA4, and the data is pretty close now.
Good.
GA4, UA, we haven't exactly looked at recently, but a couple of months ago it was like way off. And then the other thing is I know that, well, I shouldn't say I know, I'm assuming Google Analytics does not handle failed payments properly or even returns.
Interesting. Okay.
In other words, somebody puts in a payment in and it's like successful just like that, but then all of a sudden Stripe comes back and says, wait a second, we can't get the money, so the payment's failed.
Right. So that's really interesting too. Full caveat, this is almost impossible to troubleshoot because every e-commerce system is a little bit different, right? Okay. And so, and Google Analytics acknowledges this because they'll often state, we're giving you an approximation of what we think is happening, but you can't take it to the bank, right? So it should be anecdotally pretty close. But there are things like JavaScript failure, browsers not allowing third-party cookies, more and more people being understanding about privacy. Privacy policies actually working and preventing you from looking, if you have a privacy policy system and people say, yeah, I don't want to be tracked, that sounds scary. And then suddenly, it's Google Analytics is not be able to get the data.
Yeah, and so some of that is like, I understand, but then when we see Google Analytics giving us more sales than the store, I'm like, what the heck?
Well, and that has to do, I think, with how Google Analytics tracks e-commerce, right? When a sale happens on your website, depending on how your website's set up, and again, without looking at it and knowing the system exactly, but at a certain point, your system is sending a special data into Google Analytics, right? And depending on when that data is sent would affect that. So for instance, in the example you gave us with Stripe, so let's say I make a purchase and when the confirmation page, your order's been sent, that's typically when the data is sent to Google Analytics. But if later Stripe receives data and rejects the payment, because that happened after the data was sent into Google Analytics, then, Google Analytics isn't connected to Stripe.
Yeah.
Right? I don't even know if you can connect Google Analytics to Stripe and have Stripe send data, or if you need to switch the order of things and have Stripe validate it before it gets to the confirmation page, right? Or if Stripe can even work that fast, right? So those are things that I would look at. Now GA4, if you got it to work with WooCommerce, props to you. And Brian, if that's what you did,
Brian did it.
You're amazing, right? Because very few people are getting that yet.
at this point, if you heard somebody say that you're amazing, your response is, wait, what? Say that again. I couldn't quite hear you. Have them
Right.
repeat it.
Yeah. I have a client on Shopify, and I'm trying to figure it out, right? And it's going to have to involve some weird stuff and tag manager and blah, blah, blah. It's not going to be easy if I want the data in GA4. And then once Shopify converts and actually enables it manually, then I have to turn off that stuff to make sure there's not a conflict, right? So I'm kind of dreading this, but alas, those are the things that I'd have to look at, right? Because we don't know when the data is being sent to Google Analytics, if it's before or after Stripe processes the payments, in which case, if it could be something like that, where it's assuming the payment goes through and sends it into Google Analytics, that would over-report. But then that would make me worry as a marketer, because you said double sometimes.
1 month was almost double. Remember that, Brian?
So,
yeah,
that would make me worried that, like, wow, we're really, like, half the people who made a purchase, their credit card didn't even work, because that's what that would have to mean.
Yeah.
And that would make me either worry that, like, I'm getting a lot of fraudulent purchases, or there's something really wrong with Stripe. Like, that would make me worried if that were the case. Maybe it's just a bad month. But the other thing that I would worry about too is, I think in Google Analytics, you can only set one currency. So if you're running two different countries in one Google Analytics profile, you've picked a currency, just like you've picked one time zone. So if you're buying in Canadian dollars and US dollar is stronger or weaker, that Google Analytics isn't making that conversion. So if you're adding up, okay, this is how many Canadian dollars they made, and here's how many US dollars they made. Oh my goodness, the numbers are way off. Well, that's because Google Analytics is only reporting whatever currency you've set it to report.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. The conversion is pretty stable between US and Canada. So I could see, like, if we're a few dollars off, that's okay. Right. One of the things that Ryan and I were looking at, we hadn't yet looked at, is in GA4. I guess in UA also, but in GA4, I was kind of liking it. We need to look at the actual number of items. In other words,
but
the actual number of items associated with the transactions, because they list them there. If all those match up, then we know that it's like one of these dollar conversion or weird things. And that we could kind of explain some of that away, I think.
What were you thinking, Brian? What I was supposed to say was, at least with GA4, it's now lesser compared to like the actual sales. So what you mentioned earlier about JavaScript failing or browser protection, that makes sense. That particular issue with the double sales was with the more on the UA or Universal Analytics side.
Correct.
It's probably because of I don't know, like a double script or something, because it's like the difference between Universal Analytics is that it's easier to like enable it. Before it's just like click a button and then that's it. But with GA4 now, there's like a couple of things that you need to do, especially like when you're working with Google Tag Manager. You have to like have that JSON file like what we did, Dave. We don't do that with Universal Analytics.
That's right. That's what we were talking about. It's like,
I think that comes into play.
Yeah, right. It's really tough. Like I had a client that it wasn't e-commerce, but the sign up process for this just to become a customer. They sold stuff online, but it wasn't e-commerce, short version. The sign up process to become a member of this website was so complicated. Nobody could explain it to me for me to even validate whether what we thought was a conversion was really a conversion. But with Google Analytics 4, what you've done, Brian, you might have been doing it right in Google Analytics 4, and the old default process for UA isn't even right. Because it's automated. Maybe the way you built the Google GA4 is correct and UA is wrong because it's default.
We were looking at some of that because UA is so much simpler, right? There's only a few things you go through and you click for e-commerce and all of that.
Have you done a test purchase? Like sometimes you can create a $1 product or.
Yeah, what we really need to do, Brian, is we need to set up a test site and verify some of this stuff there. You know what I mean?
I wonder if you just do a test product, like create a $1 product and just do it on the live site just to see if it shows up in both Universal and.
We could do that. We could do that.
Might be even easier. But this is where the time zone matters too. So for instance, Dave, you're in the West Coast. And if the company is based on the East Coast of Canada and they're in my time zone, that's a 4-hour. Sorry, that's not a 4-hour. No, it's a 4-hour difference, right?
It's 3 hours, but yeah.
3 hour. So the point is that when it's the time zone matters in Google Analytics because if a session is active when it hits midnight, the session starts over.
That's true. Yeah.
So it could be 9 o'clock at night, your time, and midnight, their time, or, all that time zone. I get so confused with time zone, but yeah, that could really monkey with your data.
That's
so
true.
I'd be very curious what time zone is set to Google Analytics Universal. Because like you said, you just noticed that the time zone wasn't right for GA4.
Yeah.
And that if since let's say now some businesses are more like 9 to 5 kind of companies, but if you're in a business that does a lot of work, a lot of sales in the evening,
it could make a
in the middle of that evening, the time zone resets, and now it's the new session you've just lost, and things are attributed to the next day. The session starts over, so you don't even know the original source of the traffic. It could really monkey with your data.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, it could a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that we do need to look at. UA on for time zone.
Okay. But also one thing to consider is GA4. I mean, I haven't measured this to know the implications, but one of the things GA4 is doing to account for privacy restrictions is rolling out machine learning for conversions across the data set. In other words, they are by default projecting the total number of conversions you get, accounting for the fact that they are losing some data just by privacy rules. So I don't know if that affects e-commerce.
But I think that's one thing that you had talked about in the past is why you want to start getting GA4 going, so it starts learning and doing the better estimations.
Right.
And so, the overarching thing is, it's not the exact number. It's not that important, right? If we're off by 10%, okay, that's not a big deal. As long as we have the data to be able to make good decisions.
Right.
But I don't want to, like, from one month to the next, if there's, the organic sales are 50% higher than the total sales, and the next month it's accurate, it's like, we wouldn't be able to rely on it.
I would look at source, the default channel grouping for the sales and look to see if you're getting more direct visits generating sales than another channel. With the reminder that when Google Analytics doesn't know the source, it's going to report it as direct. So if you have an unusual high number of direct visitors that convert, that might suggest that something's going wrong with the attribution, like the session restarting in the middle of the day, or middle of the afternoon or evening. I would also check conversion rates for mobile.
Oh,
In case there's something strange with the mobile, like something interfering with the Google Analytics script executing. That's not common with Tag Manager these days. It used to be a big deal, but Google is much better than it used to be.
Okay.
But it might be worth looking at those things. But I think going through a test purchase is going to be really valuable, not just the end data, but like going and as you step through the process, making sure the analytics script is on every page, figuring out which page is actually sending the data of the purchase into Google Analytics and making sure it's the right page, right? Those kind of step-by-step things will help you figure this out. But then, I mean, it just all comes back to the idea that Google Analytics never claims to be able to get 100% of the data. So we're always going to be a little bit off. So we're always going to just have to make projections. Now, double would concern me, right? If I had double the sales than was reported, that's something wrong.
Yeah. Okay.
But if it's 5% off, oh, okay. Moving on.
Yeah. If it was 5% off, and that would be fine.
10%, I might start to worry.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope it's out. It's a tough issue to troubleshoot without looking at the code, but I hope I gave you some ideas to help look through.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is, and it might be for everybody else's benefit too, is we'll power through some of this stuff here in the next week, and then if we still have some issues or questions, maybe we'll record a video and send it to you. Take a quick look at, because if it's a problem for us and we figure out how to solve it, for the rest of you folks, it might be worthwhile too.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.